$20 million. 5 years of research, dozens of engineers with top secret clearances, and it all ended in exactly 3 minutes under the wheel of a taxicab, driven by a man who didn't even realize what he had just run over. Because what lay on the asphalt in that moment was not an ordinary cat. Inside its skull was a microphone. Beneath its ribs lay a battery the size of a matchbox. Running all the way down its spine, right to the tip of its tail, was a fine wire antenna. This was a living, breathing espionage platform built by the Central Intelligence Agency of the United States. And right now, it was dead. A warm, late autumn day, a quiet street in northwest Washington, D.C., just a few blocks from a Soviet diplomatic compound. An unmarked van idles by the curb. The side door slides open, and 2 men in plainclothes step out. One of them is holding a carrier. Inside that carrier is a gray tabby cat, pulled just a minute ago from a specialized climate-controlled transport box. The man crouches down and opens the grate. The animal hesitates for a second, then steps out onto the sidewalk. It takes a few steps, then a few more. In the handler's earpiece, the transmitter feeds a steady, crystal-clear signal. The cat approaches the curb. It steps down onto the asphalt. Coming around the corner, without dropping its speed, is a taxi. A dull thud. The signal in the earpiece cuts to dead static. One of the men slowly takes off his hat. The other just stands there, staring at the street. And here is the first question we need to stop and consider. How many smart, educated, highly serious people with advanced engineering degrees do you think had to sign off on this project before a cat with a microphone in its skull was let out onto that street? According to indirect data from declassified memos, no fewer than 40 people, 40 signatures, and not a single one across the grain. To understand how something like this becomes possible, you have to look at one specific man. His actual name remains redacted in open sources. He is known only by his bureaucratic designation, an officer of the SR-5 division. According to a partially declassified internal report, in the early 1960s, this officer inherited a task that had already broken 2 of his predecessors. His mission: record a conversation between 2 Soviet diplomats in Washington who were far too smart to ever say anything important indoors. They talked in the park, sitting on a bench, speaking in hushed tones, covering their mouths with their hands. 6 months of physical surveillance had yielded nothing but useless tape. Just the rustling of leaves, distant car horns, and fragments of meaningless phrases. The officer's career was hanging by a thread over a problem that had no solution.
By this time, over at Langley, a unit with the dry name of the Directorate of Science and Technology was staffed by a very specific breed of men. These weren't field operatives with guns. They were engineers, physicists, chemists, and biologists. The guys who turned science fiction into espionage tools. And they already had one highly specific, rarely mentioned failure under their belts. A few years prior to the Acoustic Kitty program, this exact lab had tried to use a dead rat as an audio bug. The logic was simple. A dead rodent in an alleyway near a Target window arouses zero suspicion. They built the prototypes, ran field tests in a European capital, and discovered a catastrophic flaw. Stray cats kept finding the dummy rats and eating them, electronics and all. The program had to be scrapped. But it was out of the ashes of that failure, according to one theory, that the next idea was born. What if we make the predator itself the carrier? The one thing nobody will ever eat and nobody will ever suspect.
Now, before you click away, and please don't click away yet, because this last part is the one that's actually going to change your life, not the recipes. This. I'm about to give you something that took me 3 years to figure out on my own. A single grocery list, around $30, that feeds you all 7 of these lunches for an entire week, with leftovers. Most women I talk to say the same thing. I'd love to eat better, but groceries are so expensive now. And I hear you. Eggs cost what a steak used to cost. But here's the secret that the food industry doesn't want you to know. Cooking less actually costs less.
The program was highly classified. It was given a code name that decades later, when the files were unsealed in the 1990s, would become legendary in the annals of intelligence failures: Acoustic Kitty. The total budget, according to estimates revealed in the memoirs of former CIA officer Victor Marchetti, was roughly $20 million in 1960s money. Adjusted for inflation, that's enough to fund a modest space program. And all of it was allocated for one simple goal: turn a cat into a spy. The architects of this scheme were not cartoon villains or mad scientists. They were the best engineers in the country, men who had come up through the military labs of World War II, who had designed miniature electronics for aviation and nuclear submarines. They were used to impossible tasks. They were told, embed a microphone inside a cat. They didn't ask why, they asked how. And this is where we reach the darkest part of the story, the part that usually gets glossed over in the quick, quirky summaries of the tale.
Tell me honestly, have you ever stopped to wonder exactly how many animals passed through the surgical labs of global intelligence agencies during the Cold War? Nobody knows the exact number. Based on indirect data, for the Acoustic Kitty program alone, anywhere from 20 to 40 cats went under the knife. And that was just one program out of dozens. In a fully equipped veterinary operating room, under general anesthesia, 3 foreign objects were surgically implanted into the cat. A miniature microphone, the smallest available in the 1960s, roughly the size of a pea, was implanted at the base of the skull, right near the ear. The capsule was positioned so that the animal's own ear canal acted as a natural acoustic funnel. A power source was implanted in the chest cavity, under the ribs. The batteries of that era were the size of a matchbox, incredibly heavy and ran hot when active. Finally, the tail was turned into an antenna. A fine wire was woven down the length of the vertebrae to the very tip, capable of transmitting a signal to a receiver several hundred yards away.
The surgery took about an hour. The incisions were sutured so the fur would completely hide the scars. Recovery took weeks. The first cats died on the operating table, or in the days immediately following. Their bodies couldn't handle the trauma. The electronics overheated. The wires shifted. Infections found their way through the stitches. The engineers went back to the drawing board. They shrank the battery. They repositioned the mic. They operated again. They lost more cats. There is one detail rarely mentioned anywhere. According to the recollections of a project veterinarian, the first cat to actually survive the full implantation cycle was a 3-year-old gray tabby female. She was kept in an isolated room with warm lighting and round-the-clock monitoring. The staff even gave her a name, though that name has been permanently lost to the redacted files. 3 months after the surgery, she stopped eating. She was euthanized. The tech was extracted, sterilized, and put into the next cat. And right now, in this exact second, a question probably just popped into your head. One I can't answer. If they did this to cats, what were they doing to other animals? Declassified documents briefly mention parallel programs involving pigeons, dolphins, ravens, and even sharks. The vast majority of those files remain highly classified. We will likely never know the true body count. But the physical survival of the cat was just the beginning of their problems, because once the cat finally recovered and the team took it into the testing room, they discovered something that should have been painfully obvious on day one. A cat is not a drone. A cat is a cat. The animal did not go where it was directed. The cat lay down wherever it was warm. The cat wandered off toward the smell of food. The cat would stop in the middle of a mission to groom itself. If it heard a bird, it completely forgot about the microphone, the antenna, the Soviet embassy, and the entire Cold War. The state-of-the-art microphone embedded in its skull faithfully transmitted back to the operators the sounds of birds chirping, the loud rasp of a feline tongue on fur, and only rare, unintelligible fragments of human speech.
And so, the engineers were handed another impossible task: train the cat. Months were burned on this. They brought in animal behaviorists, university academics, and circus trainers. They tried to condition the cat to walk a specific distance, stop on cue, and ignore food. According to one partially corroborated account, the animal was implanted with a secondary override, a neurostimulator designed to suppress the sensation of hunger, just so the smell of hot dogs from a street vendor wouldn't blow an operation. By the beginning of the crucial year, the team finally had their asset, a living cat, mutilated by multiple surgeries, wired with internal electronics, partially trained, with a suppressed appetite, capable of moving in a specific direction on command, at least for the first few minutes. Its transmitter worked flawlessly. The microphone could pick up human speech from 30 feet away. The lab tests were deemed a success. Only one thing remained: the field test.
Right here, before I tell you about that final minute, stop and ask yourself a question. If you were sitting in that van 30 seconds before opening the door, would you have stopped the operation? Would you have spoken up and told your colleagues that one critical detail had been overlooked? When psychologists later interview people involved in massive systemic failures, most gave an honest answer. No, they wouldn't have said a word. Because when 39 people have already said yes, the 40th guy who says no doesn't save the day. He just gets fired. The location chosen for the maiden deployment was a small park near a Soviet compound in Washington, D.C. Some sources point to a spot near the facility on Wisconsin Avenue. According to intel, 2 Soviet persons of interest were scheduled to sit on a bench and talk. The cat's mission? Walk about 20 yards from the drop point to the bench, lie down nearby, and stay there for the duration of the conversation. A clean, simple task. The surveillance van arrived early. Inside sat a surgeon, a comms engineer, the operational handler, and a driver. They pulled the cat from the box, checked the transmitter's telemetry, and confirmed the signal was clean. They slid the door open. The cat stepped out.
It took its first few steps down the sidewalk, confident, calm, heading in the exact right direction. The handler's earpiece fed him the ambient noise of a busy city day. The cat approached the curb. It stepped down, and it began to cross the asphalt toward the park on the other side. Nobody, in the entire process of designing this operation, had thought about this one tiny detail. Not a single engineer, biologist, behaviorist, or spy, over 5 years and $20 million, had asked the question that a 5-year-old child would have asked. What about the cars? The taxi came around the corner at normal city speed. The driver didn't even have time to brake. The impact was instantaneous. The cat died on the spot. The signal in the earpiece vanished into static. The 2 men in the van sat in total silence. Then, one of them stepped out, slowly walked over to the carcass, scooped it up, and carried it back to the vehicle. Destroying the evidence was far more important than grief. Inside that animal was classified electronics that, under no circumstances, could fall into the hands of city sanitation workers, who might start asking uncomfortable questions about why a stray alley cat had a titanium capsule in its skull. Think about the sheer scale of this. In the American capital, in the early 1960s, a living biological spy worth $20 million took a 3-minute stroll down the sidewalk. Today, for that kind of money, you can buy 15 Reaper combat drones. Back then, it bought one cat that couldn't make it 20 yards to work. The program was quietly killed within weeks. In the official internal report, a fragment of which was declassified and published by the National Security Archive in 2001, the phrasing was almost philosophical. The project, the document stated, would not be practical in a highly specialized needs scenario. Not a single word about a dead cat, a taxi, or $20 million. A dry, bureaucratic epitaph for 5 years of work. But the real mystery of this story isn't how the cat died. The real mystery is how this project was ever greenlit and pushed all the way to field testing in the first place.
There were brilliant people at Langley, truly brilliant, men who designed satellite surveillance systems, men who cracked Soviet ciphers, men who planned global operations. How is it possible that in dozens of project meetings, no one ever stood up and said the obvious? Gentlemen, a cat does not understand what a road is. A cat does not understand a rendezvous schedule. A cat does not take orders. We are trying to build an intelligence platform out of a creature that, despite thousands of years of domestication, still hasn't figured out how to come when it's called. The answer, if you look at it coldly, lies in the nature of massive bureaucracies. The larger the budget, the fewer people inside the organization are willing to pull the plug. Once the first few million are spent, the sunk cost fallacy kicks in. Admitting a mistake becomes far more expensive than continuing the delusion. When dissertations have been defended, reports filed, and promotions secured, nobody wants to be the guy to stand up and say the emperor has no clothes, and the cat is just a cat. That is how a system devours itself. That is how genius engineers spend 5 years perfecting the solution to a problem that never had a solution to begin with. And here is an uncomfortable thought that nobody likes to entertain. If something like this could happen inside the most powerful intelligence agency on Earth, with the best engineers and an unlimited budget, for 5 consecutive years, what is happening right now in the corporation where you work? How many projects in your company, your city, your government exist solely because everyone is too embarrassed to shut them down? There are no villains in this story, no traitors, no fatal flaw of a single individual. The fatal flaw was the entire premise of the program, from the first line of the technical brief to the animal's last step onto the asphalt. And that is perhaps the most terrifying thing you can say about any massive structure, be it an intelligence agency, a corporation, or a state. It is highly capable of spending years and millions on something that any outside observer would throw in the trash in 30 seconds, simply because inside the structure, no one is allowed to be an outside observer.
What remains of Project Acoustic Kitty? A few pages of heavily redacted documents, vague mentions in the memoirs of former spies, the name of Victor Marchetti, who later confirmed the project's existence in his book, and dead silence regarding the exact number of animals that passed through Langley's surgical labs over those 5 years. The numbers have never been released. The archives on this specific branch of research remain partially sealed to this day. There is one final detail that rarely surfaces in the snappy, viral retellings of this story. According to the recollections of one participant, the program wasn't actually shut down the exact second the taxi hit the cat. There were a few more attempts, a few more surgeries, a few more animals. It was only when it became undeniably clear that the problem wasn't the tech, the training, or the battery, but the fundamental, unbreakable nature of the feline mind, that the project was finally scrapped, permanently, without public explanation. They built a microphone that could hear a whisper from 30 feet away. They built a transmitter that fit under a rib cage. They built an antenna out of a living tail. They conquered every law of engineering standing in their way. But they forgot to ask permission from the one and only creature without whom all their work meant absolutely nothing: the cat. And now, the ultimate question, the one the declassified files never truly answered. Do you believe Acoustic Kitty was a genuine, spectacular failure of bureaucratic incompetence? Or was it a brilliantly disguised black-budget grift, a scheme through which a few insiders siphoned millions of dollars over 5 years, knowing perfectly well from day one that a cat would never be a spy, and simply exploiting the fact that inside a top-secret program, no one is ever allowed to ask an uncomfortable question?